Good day, a grand rising. Welcome to Wake Up, the show that is not bribed, blackmailed, or in the pocket of some oligarch or another. Wake Up is independent journalism funded by you, the people, and I appreciate you so very much. It is Friday, the 11th of July, 2025, and thank you for getting us to 100K subs on YouTube. I appreciate each and every one of you, and there's some beautiful comments already in the live chat today, and I appreciate you greatly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the kind words. I went to bed last night reading kind words, and I woke up this morning reading kind words, and can't every day be full of kind words. So thank you so much. Today is a continuation of our series Wake Up Investigates, where I attempt to delve into and beyond official narratives, and today's choice is exactly that. This is a story of wealth, fame, and privilege, of industrial scale abuse on children and teen girls, of a cover-up lasting decades and at the highest levels of society, and continuing right up until this very week. That's right. It's a sorry story of an international conspiracy. And I'm here to tell you today why it matters, even though the President of the United States wants us to believe it doesn't. So I talk, of course, of this man, Jeffrey Epstein, the well-connected pedophile financier who was said to have killed himself in a Brooklyn jail in August 2019, even though hardly anyone believes that these days. Today's wake up was triggered by the announcement from Donald Trump's administration at the start of the week. This was when the American Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation issued a memo. You may or may not have seen it, but I have a handy copy right here on the screen for you. And this memo really set the cat among the pigeons, as they like to say, because what is being told by the heads of these departments, even though they didn't sign this, and these are the heads: Pam Bondi, she is the Attorney General, and Kash Patel, the Director of the FBI. And they have, for a very long period of time, been teasing people about the subject matter of this memo. Only the subject matter turned out to be not what people were hoping for at all. And when I say that they've been teasing people, that is exactly what they've been doing. They've been teasing people like it was some kind of big in-joke. They used it to score political points against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And trust me, there's no favoritism around here, certainly when it comes to politics. But Trump's team knew the abuse of Epstein and his high-powered cronies. They knew that it cut to the heart of their MAGA movement, and they used it to the max. That included President J.D. Vance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Director of FBI Kash Patel, and his deputy Dan Bongino. All of them have pushed the line that there is an Epstein file, that there is an Epstein clientele list. And suddenly, Sunday night, this appears to be somewhat cobbled together, and why we may discover shortly. But Sunday night of this week, this was the memo that was prepared and then duly dispatched. So we will start by looking at that memo in some detail. And but today, unusually, I'm going to be helped on this investigation by another person. Now, quite often, I just tackle these investigations on my own. But if I feel that somebody else has information that I don't, I like to get them involved. And on this occasion, I've drawn on the help of American investigative journalist Nick Bryant. He is somebody who is an absolute expert on this story. And he was also the man who released Epstein's black book onto the internet over a decade ago. Nick is a recognized authority on this story. He's been investigating child trafficking for over 2 decades. He wrote the Franklin scandal and has pursued the Epstein case for at least the last 13 years. And I want to play you, first of all, Nick's response to this, and then I will talk to you about my thoughts on this. So let's have a look.
What is perplexed me is for Pam Bondi to come out and say that she had the Epstein files on her desk and that she was going to release them. The Trump administration put a white elephant in the living room, and which it didn't necessarily have to do, but it did. And when Pam Bondi released the things that she released, that was kind of a nothing sandwich, because in 2015, I put Jeffrey Epstein's black book and flight logs on the internet. And I released more incriminating information in 2015 than she did in 2025. And I don't know why she did that. Or the Trump administration did that. I mean, maybe they thought that what they were releasing would satiate people's curiosity about Epstein. They didn't realize that all the material that they had released was already public. I don't know. But then they had to start really, really going in reverse at Mach 3. But there were a number of lies that were told by Bondi initially. She said that they had a truckload of evidence that they had to go through, that there were thousands of hours of child abuse material and hundreds of victims, which I'm sure that there were. But the day after Epstein was arrested, the FBI opened his safe, and his safe wasn't the kind of safe that you think of when you think of a safe. His safe was the size of a closet. And the FBI extracted disks and hard drives from his safe that had possibly, it's according to the New York Times, possibly thousands of images of child abuse material. And we're supposed to believe that the FBI didn't look at that stuff after they extracted it from the safe. We're supposed to believe that the FBI is just looking at it now. So that was a major gaffe by Epstein, or by Bondi. And then she said, and this is where she further hurt her credibility, she said that she's going to release information except that would pertain to national security. Now, what do a bunch of child molesters have to do with national security? So she dug herself into a deeper hole. And at that point, she was talking about this, and then Kash Patel said that all the videos of Epstein and others and blackmail, that was a fiction. And then they finally got together on this document that was released on Sunday night, where they said that there's no blackmail, there's no, it was suicide, there's no pedophile network. The only true statement, and that memo wasn't signed by anybody, which is very strange. It just had the logo of the Department of Justice and FBI. But the only truthful thing in that fact and that document was that there were over 1,000 victims. I mean, that's the only thing that's truthful in that entire document. And the Trump administration thought it could get away with it, obviously, because it issued it. But Americans, and I think more and more are waking up to this, that these girls, Jeffrey Epstein trafficked girls to his powerful cronies for 25 years. And there were a lot of girls that were molested by a lot of older men. And some of those men were even actually sadistic to these girls. Some of these guys are sadistic. So the fact that it thought it could cover it up with that memo, and Americans would be docile after that, was a great miscalculation by the Trump administration.
And not only Americans, this has caused controversy all around the world, certainly in the UK, because this is a story that touches us all. What could be worse than a story of international child trafficking involving very powerful people, men and women, and all covered up? And I'm sure you've realized by now that was a recording of Nick. I recorded an interview with him last night because of the time of our show. It would be stupid o'clock for him to appear live. And so he very kindly found time for me yesterday in order to be able to do that. And as you will see, as today's investigation progresses, he has contributed greatly. And I am very, very grateful to him for it. So I just want to make my own comments about this. So this, as he pointed out, not signed by anybody, which is already curious because we know who's behind it. And all of them this week, Vance, Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and President Trump have all damaged their reputations, but maybe they don't care, because the fact that we are dealing with issues of harm against young people, but it has been dealt with by them like a TV game show for the last few years, is something to consider about the unsavory people I shall be looking at today as I unpack this whole sorry story. So here's the thing, right? This is what this memo says. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll just read the most salient points. As part of our commitment to transparency, the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have conducted an exhaustive review of investigative holdings relating to Jeffrey Epstein. They talk about going through locked cabinets, desks, closets, other areas where material may have been stored. And they go on to say that the files relating to Epstein include a large volume of images of Epstein, images and videos of victims who are either minors or appear to be minors, and over 10,000 downloaded videos and images of illegal child sex abuse material. So this is some extraordinary stuff. It then goes on to say much of the material is subject to court-ordered sealing. Only a fraction of this material would have been aired publicly had Epstein gone to trial, as the seal served only to protect victims and did not expose any additional third parties to allegations of illegal wrongdoing. I have a problem even reading this out. How could they possibly have felt composing this nonsense? For that is what it is. It goes on to say that the systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. They say we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. Maybe they just weren't looking hard enough. I find it astonishing that they are admitting that this man had thousands of images of child abuse, and they are claiming that there's no third party involvement. That is astonishing. There is no way on this earth or any other that Jeffrey Epstein operated alone. This was operated as a business. And so no wonder people were in uproar at the release of this memo, because we all felt that we were being sold a dud. And that's really what informed today's Wake Up, because I, as someone who has long looked into the issue of child abuse and child trafficking, I simply could not accept this memo at face value because it's nonsense. They go on to say, in absolute gaslighting fashion, one of our highest priorities is combating child exploitation and bringing justice to victims. Perpetuating unfounded theories about Epstein serves neither of those ends, but they all perpetuated it in order to get into the White House. It was very much part of their ticket. New transparency. We're anti-establishment. We're going to reveal to you what Biden refused to. That's how they sold themselves. And now suddenly it's perpetuating unfounded theories. They talk about how they've labored to provide the public with maximum information. It's so appalling that when I first read this, I actually thought I was going to projectile vomit. It's such gaslighting, but that's not the all of it. They then went on to conclude in this memo that Epstein died by suicide. They say that's further supported by video footage from the common area of the special housing unit where Epstein was housed at the time of his death at the Metropolitan Correction Center. And they say that the FBI's independent review of this footage confirmed that from the time Epstein was locked in his cell around 10:40 p.m. on August the 9th, 2019, until around 6:30 p.m. the next morning, they say nobody entered any of the tiers on the landing or in the area where Epstein was being housed. Well, so here's the thing. As I say, Epstein didn't acquire these children or these images on his own. So even though we are told he is dead, supposedly, there is actually still room for charging to take place. Unquestionably, the fact that they're admitting that all of this is available to them. And as we will see, and as many of you already know, because Wake Up is followed by really savvy people who know what's going on, and they can smell, see, and hear a crock when it's presented to them. And this memo was a crock, but the worst of it was not yet done. And as for the video, it ended up with more questions than answers, of course, way more questions than answers. In it, we saw Epstein being escorted to his cell at around 7:49 p.m. on August the 9th. And then for the remainder of the night, the only recorded activity near Epstein's cell was a guard seen walking around it at around 10:39 p.m., followed by another appearance on camera at 10:41 p.m. But there was a missing minute on the video, and people are wise to this stuff now. And it was the missing minute that triggered Donald Trump in the White House, that along with a suggestion of Epstein's involvement with intelligence. So what happened? And as you see from this picture, people are like, that's not even the cell door. Well, actually, where it says number 46, that's the door you go through to the corridor that takes you to Epstein's door. But nonetheless, the video does not stand up to scrutiny, and they know it. I think I'm wondering now, and I think many people are as well, that MAGA has become such an all-embracing, all-accepting cult. I'm going to use the word cult, that they thought they could get away with it. Oh, how very wrong they were. Even some of the biggest MAGA supporters have turned on them. So what happened in the White House? Well, this happened. A reporter asked Pam Bondi, there she is, and there's Marco Rubio in the middle, and then obviously President Donald Trump. A reporter in the White House, after the memo was released, talked about whether Epstein was tied to intelligence agencies and also asked about the missing minute. Trump listened, and you could see that he was getting increasingly wound up because he can't hide it when he's ticked up and when people are crossing a line that he doesn't want them to. And before Pam Bondi could respond in full to the reporter, Trump jumped in, asked if he could, interrupt, even though it was evident he was going to anyway. She was hardly going to say no. And then Trump said to the reporter, and I recognize having some experience in my life of narcissism, I recognize not only what Trump was doing as gaslighting, but his absolute fury, which I believe is narcissistic, but obviously I'm not in a position to diagnose him. But all I can go on is the evidence. And the evidence was he turned around to the reporter, and bear in mind, this is something that has been promised to people for a very, very long time. It involves, should I need to remind anybody again, allegations of international child trafficking. And Trump responded to the reporter, are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things of, and are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable, because he sought to diminish what the reporter was saying and sought to diminish the message, which will backfire on him if it hasn't already. And then he turned to Pam Bondi and said, do you want to waste your time? Do you feel like answering? Which she did. Bondi went on to explain about the missing minute of CCTV footage from outside Jeffrey Epstein's cell. She said that the video system is reset every night, resulting in the same minute being missed every night. She said the Department of Justice intends to publish additional footage to prove this regular reset process. But it was all too late. Trump had put not only my back up, but millions of people around the world, and including his core audience, because what he showed was stunning arrogance, the lack of care and concern for victims and survivors evident. But there is more for me as an investigative journalist, and it is this. He sounded absolutely like he wanted to move on from the subject, because somehow it's a subject that he needs us all to move on from. Is it because he is implicated in the Epstein scandal? Elon Musk said he is, because when their bromance ended recently, Musk tweeted about this. In fact, here he is. Or rather, here it is. This is Elon Musk's tweet. This was on the 6th of June. And he tweeted, as you can see, time to drop the really big bomb at real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, DJT. And then several days later, Musk backtracks saying, I regret some of my posts about President real Donald Trump last week. They went too far. However, he didn't say which ones apparently went too far. And after the memo had been released, Trump tweeted again. A counter was 0000, the official Jeffrey Epstein pedophile arrest counter. And he said, what's the time? Oh, look, it's no one has been arrested o'clock again. And over the last few days, he's continued to tweet about this, referring to Peanut the squirrel. I think you'll remember the news story about that earlier this year. And Elon Musk said they arrested and killed Peanut, but have not even tried to file charges against anyone on the Epstein client list. Government is deeply broken. Now we know that Elon Musk has a dog in the race. He's fallen out with Trump over all manner of things, including Trump not being a fulsome supporter rather of electric vehicles. And also they clash because Elon Musk had an idea of who he wanted to run NASA, and it wasn't the same person that Trump wanted. And it was inevitable that they were going to fall out. We've been talking about that forever around here. It was as inevitable could be. And but Trump soon dismissed Musk's claims in an interview with NBC News. He said, that's called old news. That's been old news. This has been talked about for years and years. And as you know, I was not friendly with Epstein for probably 18 years before he died. I was not friendly with him at all. So they were said to have fallen out over a business deal. But either way, just because Trump fell out with him doesn't mean nothing happened when they were friends. But I don't need Elon Musk or anybody else to tell me what is right or wrong here. Trump's team judged the public mood very, very badly, and Trump's following dismissive attitude was worse, doubling down that there is no evidence when there is stacks about child abuse is not going to help you, Mr. President. Some want to believe it's 3D chess, 4D chess, 5D chess, part of the plan, they say. Please, this is a continuation of the old way of doing things, where the establishment tell you there's nothing to see here and expect you to move along. Only millions of us won't. We won't move along. Hence, for me, certainly, the reason behind today's show. As I say, as someone who has long covered issues of child sexual assault and trafficking, I definitely don't think it's time to move on, Mr. President. In fact, we think it's time to dig even deeper and reveal national and international complicity across all areas of public life, including royalty, political, financial, and media. Nick Bryant, as you can expect, was outraged at the suggestion that there is no evidence. And he is somebody who's long talked with survivors. He had long communicated with Virginia Giuffre, probably the most famous survivor who sadly took her life in April. We will be talking about that shortly. And actually, Nick Bryant has written a brilliant piece about that called Requiem, rather, for Virginia on Zero Hedge. I've put a link in the description, and it's a phenomenal piece. But this is what Nick Bryant has to say about the idea that not only should we move along, but that there are no victims and no client list. Have a listen. Let me just make sure I've got that lined up.
This is absurd. I know there's so much evidence out there that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking these girls. All you have to do is talk to the girls, that are now young women that were trafficked. I mean, they'll provide you with a bunch of Jeffrey Epstein's cronies that molested them. So, and that's another thing that's really troubling with this is perhaps the most important thing that you can say to a victim of sexual abuse or sexual assault is, I believe you. And probably the worst thing that you can say to them is, I don't believe you. And that's what the Trump administration did with all these victims. It said, I don't believe you. And that's really, really horrific. As I've said, the worst thing you can say to a victim of abuse is, I don't believe you. And the best thing that you can say to them is, I believe you. When Alfredo Rodriguez, Jeffrey Epstein's house manager, stole his black book, and that's how I was able to get it. The FBI eventually impounded it, and then a lawyer representing some Epstein victims got it, and then I got it through him. And Alfredo Rodriguez circled people in the book that he thought were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein as far as Jeffrey Epstein's pedophilic pandering. And Virginia Giuffre and Ghislaine Maxwell sued each other for defamation, and Virginia Giuffre named a number of her perpetrators. And Virginia was treated pretty viciously at times by some of these perpetrators, and especially by some of by Epstein and Maxwell. But here's where we get some double corroboration. Okay, Rodriguez circled the name of Ghislaine Maxwell, and Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by Ghislaine Maxwell. Rodriguez, the house manager, circled the name of Les Wexner, who was a billionaire and gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over his entire empire. So Rodriguez circled his name, and Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by Les Wexner. Bill Richardson is the former governor of New Mexico, and he was also Clinton's energy czar. And his name is circled, and Virginia Giuffre also said that he molested her. Ehud Barak's name is circled. He's the former prime minister of Israel. And Virginia said that she had been molested by Ehud Barak and that he was a rather nasty individual. Alan Dershowitz's name is circled by Rodriguez, and Virginia said that she'd been molested by Alan Dershowitz, I think 6 times. Now, she waffled on that a little bit. I think that there was some leverage on her. And then Epstein founded this faux modeling agency called MC Squared with a very infamous agent named Jean-Luc Brunel, who's been molesting models forever. He's likes to Bill Cosby them, give them roofies and then molest them. Now, Rodriguez circled his name, and Virginia Giuffre said that she'd been molested by him. So there's a lot of corroboration. Well, at least there's double corroboration with some of these perps. And to say that Virginia Giuffre wasn't molested by any of these people is really, really an abomination.
And it is exactly what it is. Let me just bring myself back again. It is an absolute abomination. I am insulted that they would dare to release that memo and attempt to obviously put an end to this, but it's far from over. And as Nick has just outlined there, plenty of corroboration, plenty of evidence, certainly plenty of allegations, which we will explore further and what that may or may not link to. But before we do that, let's first go back. I think. Here we go. And let's look at some of the people who helped Epstein rise and who influenced and supported him. Nick has referred to a number of them there, but I want to delve into them more deeply. So, Jeffrey Epstein was born in Brooklyn, New York in January 1953. His parents, Pauline and Seymour Epstein, were Jewish. Pauline worked as a school aide, and Seymour worked for the New York City Department as a groundskeeper and gardener. Jeffrey and his younger brother Mark grew up in a working class neighborhood in Coney Island, Brooklyn. At the age of 21, Jeffrey worked as a physics and maths teacher for teens. And it was here that he was reported for showing inappropriate behavior towards underage female students at the time, paying them constant attention, touching them inappropriately, trying to socialize with them outside of the classroom. Like, I'm only laughing because it beggars belief that the indication was already there. People were already reporting him at the age of 21. And, you know, it's that old thing, isn't it? Pedophiles, they gravitate towards wherever young children are. And we've learnt that, obviously, over the last few years, that is absolutely the case, whether that is pedophiles working with children in religion or in schools or in clubs like the Scouts, as one example. So we've seen that happen. But Epstein was a man with an eye for money and apparently very talented, actually, in that regard, although he was considered to be an unremarkable financier in his job. But it would appear that being a financier, which is what he eventually went on to do, was probably secondary to why he was really in the positions that he was. So what happened was, while he was at that school being a teacher and behaving inappropriately towards young people, he became acquainted with Alan Greenberg, who was the chief executive of Bear Stearns, the then trading house in Wall Street. And it was Greenberg's son and daughter who were attending the school that Epstein worked at. And Epstein clearly impressed Alan Greenberg for one reason or another. And Greenberg took Epstein under his wing, got him a job at Bear Stearns, and Epstein progressed through the ranks extraordinarily quickly for someone who wasn't even 25. And he seemed to be able to charm influential men. Was it because they recognized the money-hungry look in his eyes, which he was famous for, or was it something else they had picked up about him? And as Nick has already referred to, another man who was to become prominent and significant in Epstein's life was fashion billionaire Leslie Wexner, who Wexner oversees and CEO of many huge fashion houses, including Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie and Fitch. Victoria's Secret, the models with often very childlike bodies. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Victoria's Secret's models. Abercrombie and Fitch recently exposed for being an operation that was abusing people. And what happened extraordinary, as Nick has just said, was that for whatever reason, Leslie Wexner gave Epstein power of attorney, which included transferring his New York mansion over to Epstein. Over the intervening years and following Epstein's indictment, the men fell out. But what was it about Jeffrey Epstein that impressed the billionaire Leslie Wexner so much. And what we are hearing and what we've heard for a very long time is that Jeffrey Epstein had a series of very selective friendships with people in high society places. And this was an absolute must for him. For he was ambitious, and he'd come from a very kind of like working class background. And he had his eye on the prize of being very much part of high society and in New York. He was also friends with, can I find an image here? Let me see if I can find an image here, because I think it would be very helpful at this stage. He was also friends with media tycoon Robert Maxwell. Now, Robert Maxwell, of course, we were told, I mean, hardy heart, that he'd died in a boating accident on his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, named after his daughter, who became Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend. And Maxwell was said to have died in an accident, as I say, on the 5th of November, 1991. I wonder if I can just bring up an image of them together. I think that would be quite useful at this stage. Let me just see if I can. I have so many images, so forgive me if I'm not able to bring up as many as I'd like to, because there's many I'd like to. Here we go. Yeah, here's a oh, actually, no, this is of that's of, forgive me, that the image I'm just going to pick up there is of Maxwell and Donald Trump. Yes, no, that's not. I'll bring that in later. But anyway, just so Jeffrey Epstein had a good relationship with Robert Maxwell, and Robert Maxwell was many things. He was a Mossad spy. He was a fraud, and he was, as I say, a media boss. Shortly after his death, it was revealed that 460 million pounds was missing from his business's pension funds. And Epstein, in the wake of that, Ghislaine Maxwell hadn't long moved to New York. This was 1991. And she was somebody who had made a big impression on the London social scene, high society social scene. It's definitely not the same kind of social scene that I inhabited in the 90s. But she was amongst, princes and future prime ministers and all those kind of people. And she moved in those type of circles because of her father. And what happened was, after Maxwell died, and then it all started to come out about him, Epstein was one of the few New York friends who stuck by Ghislaine. And I would imagine that he saw an opportunity to milk. She was a high society party girl. She was in with royalty, with politicians, even presidents. She brought contacts into Epstein's life and was his opening to entrancing well-connected people and supplying them with young girls. And one of those people that she brought in to Epstein's life, famously, was Prince Andrew, also known as the Duke of York. Prince Andrew settled a civil case without admitting guilt with one of Epstein's victims, the late Virginia Giuffre. After Epstein was released from prison, this is about a charge that I'll be talking about shortly. This photograph was taken in December 2010, and it captures Andrew and Epstein strolling in Central Park during one of Andrew's visits to New York City and staying at Epstein's place. And in July 2011, following this, the Duke's role as trade envoy was terminated, and he reportedly cut all ties with Epstein, only he didn't. And what happened was, on the 30th December 2014, a Florida court filing alleged that Prince Andrew was one of several prominent figures to have participated in sexual activities with a minor, later identified as Virginia Giuffre. Now, in the UK, which is one of the places where it was claimed they slept together, she wasn't a minor because she was 17, and the age of consent is 16 in the UK. But in other parts of the world where she alleged that she was raped by him, because you can't consent if you're underage, right? You can't consent. And 17 in my books is still a kid, really. And she claimed that she was raped by Andrew on 3 occasions, including a trip to London in 2001 when she was 17, later in New York, and also on Little St. James, the US Virgin Islands, aka Epstein's Island. And she also alleged that Epstein paid her $15,000 to have sex with Andrew, and flight logs do confirm that Andrew and Virginia were in the places she alleges that the sex happened. Now, I don't need to tell you that this picture that you're looking at now has been subject to a great deal of controversy. This was said to have been taken in Ghislaine Maxwell's Mayfair Mews House. And this was after they'd been partying at a nightclub in London. And there are people who believe that this is a fake picture. And one of them is a lady called Molly Skye Brown. And I've interviewed Molly before, and the interview is available online. And Molly was once approached by Ghislaine Maxwell, and Molly has long claimed that that photo was fake, that it was edited. And this has been picked up by Andrew's supporters, including at one stage Andrew's assistants, who contacted Molly. And I know that happened because I've seen the documentation, and they wanted to get Molly on board. And Molly was very clear. This wasn't about exonerating Prince Andrew. Molly, a survivor of child abuse herself, did not want to exonerate him, but Molly had been subject to a very weird scenario with Virginia and other survivors, in that there was clearly a gatekeeping process that was taking place, more of which shortly. And what happened with Virginia was a civil case was filed by her against Prince Andrew, and this was later settled for an undisclosed sum in February 2022. It was reported to be 12 million. We don't know the truth of that. And it was reported to have been paid by the Queen, which is almost certainly the case, because Andrew, to all intents and purposes, has never been a particularly wealthy royalty, not by the standards of like Charles, who obviously has a lot of estate that where he receives revenue from. But as one example, Andrew was also criticized because Jeffrey Epstein had cleared a debt for Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, which was reported to be in the sum of $15,000. So there was a lot of issues going on here. But what is evident is it seemed that Epstein could command friendships with royals and politicians alike. And one man who has absolutely since sought to distance himself is the now UK's American ambassador, Peter Mandelson. Mandelson served in multiple ministerial roles under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. He's like considered a Labour grandee, as they call him. And he's also a life peer in the House of Lords. He was dubbed the Prince of Darkness during his years as New Labour's spin doctor. And his links to Epstein were exposed in a 2019 report by JP Morgan Bank, who filed a lawsuit in a New York court. And Mandelson has for a while now just like not been happy at all about any mention or suggestion of an association with Jeffrey Epstein. But in that JP Morgan report, it talks about Mr. Mandelson staying at Epstein's Manhattan flat. Epstein had written to his banker on the 17th of June 2009. Peter will be staying at 71st over the weekend. There's clearly some sort of celebration taking here, birthday celebration. And at the time, Peter Mandelson was the business secretary in the UK government under then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And he was appointed UK ambassador to the United States when Donald Trump took office. And he's been asked previously if he did indeed stay at Epstein's flat. And in fact, while Epstein was in jail, and he replied, "I'm not answering any questions about him. My knowledge of him is something I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place." And when he was asked why he had an association with Epstein whilst he was in jail, Mandelson replied, "Why did many people meet him? He was a prolific networker, and I wish I'd never met him in the first place." And I suspect that Peter Mandelson is saying that purely because of really what's come out, because they, to all intents and purposes, they appear to have a friendship. Epstein, it would seem, was able to buy many friends, associates, and influences, as I say, in the world of politics, high finance, celebrity, royalty, secret services, and prime ministers and international dignitaries. We've heard a lot, haven't we, about Epstein's island, his island in the Virginia Isles. It's said to be a regular escape for many successful people, said also to include minors who were trafficked there via his airplane, which became known as the Lolita Express. And that includes people from all over the world. There have been numerous famous people who went to the island and who associated with Epstein over the years. Many of these named in a court document in January 2024, when federal judge Loretta Preska in Manhattan unsealed some documents, and she revealed the names of numerous individuals described in a 2015 civil lawsuit. And she talked about them as associates, affiliates, or victims of Epstein. And some of those individuals included, let's bring in some more images, if I may, if I can find some here. And I'd like to be able to. Actually, no, I'm going to save that for a little bit later. Some of those names included former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, the magician David Copperfield, Prince Andrew, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, actor Kevin Spacey, lawyer Alan Dershowitz, the late New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, and former Vice President Al Gore, amongst many, many others. Many others. Now, you'd think that somebody like a Prince Andrew, as one example, who, as we know, that image was pictured after Epstein was released from his first charge. So let's talk about that. But you'd think that Andrew would have more sense, or at least the advisors around him, but apparently not. Apparently the draw of Epstein was such that even after what I'm about to tell you, Andrew still maintained a relationship. So Epstein was charged in 2005 by the Palm Beach Police Department. This followed a complaint from the parents of a 14-year-old girl who claimed that something inappropriate had happened to their 14-year-old daughter at Epstein's place in Palm Beach. The police investigated and found 4 other underage girls associated with Jeffrey Epstein who were making similar problematic claims about his behavior. He was charged with unlawful activity with 4 minors, and then suddenly the investigation was removed from the Palm Beach Police Department and assigned to a grand jury. And what Nick Bryant was saying to me yesterday was, out of all of the departments and out of all of the bodies that have investigated Jeffrey Epstein, Palm Beach Police Department is one of the departments that really tried to do right by victims and survivors. But as you will see, someone stepped in the way. So what happened was he was charged, And suddenly, as I say, the investigation was removed from them. It was assigned to a grand jury. And the grand jury came back with an indictment charging him with just one count of adult solicitation. That's very different than charges to do with minors. And so what happened was that the grand jury kept completely away from allegations of child abuse, despite all the efforts of the Palm Beach Police Department to push home this point. After that, it was announced that there would be a federal grand jury, and then that was adjourned. And the Department of Justice began negotiations with Epstein and his lawyers, including the accused Alan Dershowitz. And the Department of Justice had a list of at least 32 alleged victims. But this quite atrociously resulted in the cutting of a sweetheart deal. Let me just bring in some imagery from that time because that is important. Here he is. And what happened was that the sweetheart deal was cut in 2008. Epstein was given 18 months in county jail, in which he served 13 months. The deal was sealed, it was appealed, and ultimately it was overturned. But what was absolutely what was overturned was the sealing of the deal, not anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. And in fact, he was given incredible preferential treatment. He didn't actually have to even be in prison all day. He was kept on a more localized wing. And as I say, he was given 18 months, but he served only 13 months. And he just kind of like essentially returned to prison for the evenings. So he was given extraordinary good treatment. And what happened was the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice, who released the memo this week, this goes right back again to them, right back to 2008. So the Department of Justice and Epstein's legal team colluded on the deal, and this non-prosecution agreement for him, which was revealed when the deal was unsealed. And as long as he pled guilty and provided compensation to victims, then he was essentially exonerated. But he had to kind of like serve that time. But as I say, he was looked after, and that was really more a show. It was to say we're doing something. This was nothing to do with Palm Beach. This was to do with the Department of Justice. This was to do with an assortment of attorney generals. And what happened was that the document essentially exonerated his co-conspirators, which included Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, and two of the women that the New York Times went on to accuse much later, but still the police did not act on it. And anybody who's read that agreement will tell you it's gobsmacking. It's puke worthy. It's a stunning agreement that allowed Epstein to carry on trafficking children and young people for another 10 years until he was further arrested for trafficking minors. And it was after that arrest that we were told he killed himself. So let's just have a little look at that, shall we? What we were told about Epstein killing himself. Let's bring in some imagery. Always very useful. I just want to reiterate, thank you for being here with me today. I very much appreciate it. I have no idea how long this is going to go on for. But, you know, we're in this together. So, wrong image. Let me just find a better one. Here we go. This was an image of his cell. So Jeffrey Epstein was said to have died in his prison cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York on August the 10th, 2019. As I say, this is a photo of his prison cell. This was released by the Department of Justice. And there are many issues. Even before this week, there were many issues for many people regarding Epstein's death. Where has that just gone to? That's very odd. Let me just bear Bear with me. There we go. That's better. And so some of the problems. So what we were told was that Epstein had found unresponsive in his jail cell, hanging off the side of his cell's bed, where he was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. And we were told that prison guards performed CPR, that he was transported in cardiac arrest to the New York downtown hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 6:39 a.m. The New York City medical examiner and the Justice Department ruled that Epstein's death was a suicide by hanging. Epstein's lawyers challenged the medical examiner's conclusion and opened their own investigation. And both the FBI and the Department of Justice conducted investigations into the circumstances of his death. And it became something of a thing, because it's one of those things that when you hear it, you know it's not true. It became a thing for people to say it either at the end of their tweet or when they were like appearing on shows or podcasts or whatever, to say Epstein didn't kill himself, because like the death of Princess Diana, we all knew something was wrong and untoward, and our solar plexus, our collective solar plexus, our collective understanding rejected what we were being told, and with good damn reason, as we've had further validation of that this week. So there were numerous issues with Jeffrey Epstein's suicide, so-called suicide, including the camera apparently not working, although they somehow managed to make it work, didn't they, for the videos this week. There's a lack of there was absolutely, they said there was a lack of evidence which pointed to foul play, but there was clearly a problem with protocol that wasn't being followed where Epstein was being housed. He wasn't checked on as frequently as required, and two guards responsible for conducting inmate counts had apparently fallen asleep at their desks and later falsified records, as you do. And but what remains unclear was whether the guard last seen walking towards Epstein's cell was one of the officers who fell asleep on the job. I don't know. And one of the last people who claims to have heard from Jeffrey Epstein was the journalist Michael Wolff, who said that because Epstein had asked Wolff to write his biography in 2014. Wolff had refused, but they remained in touch. And on the night before Epstein was found, he had text Michael Wolff. They'd had a brief text conversation. Wolff believes that he received the last message from him. And the last message was that Epstein wrote that he was still hanging around. This was hours before he was found hanged in his Manhattan cell. Sorry, I said Brooklyn earlier. And Wolff's, as I say, Wolff thinks that was the last message, but how weird. I'm still hanging around. How weird, right? And even Wolff said he could not, as described, have killed himself. And Wolff said, as the circumstances were presented, he also could not have been murdered. So that's interesting. The once potential biographer said not only based on the information that we've been given, he couldn't have taken his own life, but he also couldn't have been murdered. So a little bit of confusion there, but many people out there are in no doubt whatsoever. And I want to actually quote somebody who tweeted me this morning, a regular viewer around here, The Longer Game. Good morning to you. And The Longer Game is one of the people who actually is not convinced that Epstein died at all. And this is more common than you may or may not realize. And what The Longer Game tweeted me was this. It's interesting. Said Epstein died, in quotes, on the day the Messianic Jews called Tisha B'Av. It's 10th of August, 2019, which is a day of mourning. This Tisha B'Av day is not fixed. It can be anywhere between early July and early August. This is very important, as we know they love symbolism. It also suggests he might be alive. And The Longer Game is not the first person to suggest that. Is not the first and won't be the last. And I asked Nick Bryant what he thought about whether Epstein had potentially killed himself or not. And let me just find that if I can. This is what Nick had to say about that.
And that's something I don't want to speculate on, but I believe that there are so many anomalies that night, and that footage they released was where was the footage? I mean, there was no footage when Epstein killed himself 6 years ago, and now the footage just magically appears, and then it's been sliced. There's a minute sliced out of it. I mean, for me, who was somewhat agnostic about whether or not Epstein killed himself, even though I concede the anomalies, now that I see what the Trump administration has released, I'm more convinced of it than I'd previously been convinced of it. What they released was a joke. And again, as I said, why wasn't this video released 6 years ago when people were asking questions about it? The whole thing stinks. Everything that the Trump administration has tried to do with this, just it all stinks. Everything has backfired on them. They kept on getting themselves in deeper and deeper and deeper. I mean, with Pam Bondi's lies, and then you had Kash Patel lies, and then you had Deb Bongino lies, and they just realized that they dug a hole for themselves that they weren't going to get out of. So they just said, this is it. Categorical. Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. He didn't blackmail anybody. He didn't pander these children to anyone. Then why is Maxwell in jail?
Which is a question many people have asked. Why indeed? Well, I think we might discuss that. So after Epstein's death, the chessboard shifted again. I've lost count what D we're in now. But obviously, as a result of his death, all charges against him were dismissed. So what happened was the ongoing trafficking investigation shifted attention to his alleged associates, notably Ghislaine, who was arrested and indicted in July 2020. She was convicted on 5 sex trafficking related counts on December the 29th, 2021. And another associate, Jean-Luc Brunel, was arrested by French authorities in 2020. And he also later died by suicide, we were told. And let me just show you an image of all three of them together. Let me just find it. Here we go. This is actually on Epstein's airplane. There they are. And there's Ghislaine Maxwell pulling down her top and revealing her cleavage to Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel, but presumably she was too old for them. So they're both kind of looking away, right? It was all murky. And Jean-Luc Brunel, we will comment on slightly more in a short while, but the whole thing was murky, and it was clear that there had been much intervention for a very long period of time, from the cutting of the sweetheart deal, and probably just right up until, not probably, I believe right up until present day. Because the new Trump people promised much if they got into the White House. They set themselves up. As Nick Bryant said, it was them who introduced the elephant to the room. And now it was almost like they released that memo just to get this out the way. But the problem is, in their haste to move this from their desks, from the agenda, they've made issues much worse. Nick Bryant, who wasn't even necessarily convinced before that Epstein had killed himself, is now more convinced as a consequence of their memo this week and the putting out of the video with the missing minute. So the whole thing, very, very dodgy indeed. And we shouldn't forget the role of Trump's administration in all of this and where we are right now. As one example, so they've been banging on about this for a long while, for a long, long while. So here's an image, if I can find it, of Kash Patel. Let me... I'm sure it's here somewhere. Here he is. This is Kash Patel with American podcaster Benny Johnson. Benny Johnson is as mager as you can get. And he's interviewed, all of the leading lights in Trump's team. And Kash Patel had told Benny Johnson that the FBI, this was obviously before Kash Patel became the director, but Kash Patel told Benny Johnson that the FBI was obstructing the release of Jeffrey Epstein's client list. And he stated, and I'm going to quote him, he said, when Benny Johnson said to him, why do you think they're doing that? And Kash Patel responded, simple, because of who's on that list. You don't think Bill Gates is lobbying Congress night and day to prevent disclosure of that list? Bill Gates, another one who was friends with Epstein and again, who sought to distance himself after the event. And what has happened now is it seems that now Kash Patel is in a position to do something. He suddenly made the client list vanish. It would be brilliant if it wasn't so corrupt, allegedly. Which brings me to the role of the MAGA influencers. Now, I don't have a lot of time for these people. They are clearly shills online, absolutely clearly. But what happened was in February this year, February the 27th, to be precise, a group of 15 right-wing influencers visited the White House and emerged with binders labeled the Epstein Files Phase 1 that they had obtained from Attorney General Pam Bondi. Let me just bring in an image because I think it's really important for everybody to be reminded of who is complicit in the cover-up. And of course, every one of these people on this image will say, that they were kind of misled or they just double down on what's going on. Let me just see if I can, bear with me. Oh, what have I done with it? I must have it. Here we go. Here it is. Because this image makes me feel actually sick. And I commented on it at the time. So you have people like the woman in the middle, that she's Libs of TikTok, huge account. DC Drano, again, another huge account. Then there's Liz Wheeler, the blonde lady. They were all seen leaving the White House. And they were holding aloft these files. And Liz Wheeler this week has actually talked about how Pam Bondi was responsible for creating this cover. And actually, there was really nothing in there that was new. And in fact, Nick Bryant, as he'd already said a decade ago, released more information to do with Epstein and his potential clients than the Attorney General did via these bought shills. That's what I'm going to call them. Because it is unconscionable the way they behaved. Let's just imagine, right, that they really believed what they were doing here, okay? That they were a selected group of 15 influencers that they had been chosen to essentially launch the first phase of revealing who Jeffrey Epstein was. They emerged from the West Wing of the White House, like, as you can see, holding it aloft, smiling, kind of jigging. Let us not forget, they are apparently holding folders that contain details which pertain to child trafficking. What is wrong with these people? This was a con to keep the MAGA base on side. It was piecemeal. It was never about reaching an honest conclusion. And I asked Nick Bryant about that. And this is what he has to say.
A great miscalculation by the Trump administration. But these influencers that they gave the binders to, I mean, they're obviously, I'm a journalist, and I've often heard that journalists are prostitutes, and I believe that actually the prostitutes don't turn tricks to destroy lives. I mean, these journalists, these quote unquote journalists, they went and they wrote their little stories that were pure fiction. And they were obviously basically prostituting themselves for the Trump administration. And and the other thing is, none of these influencers have screamed for the truth. They've actually, some of them have come out and said, well, yeah, that's the truth. There's no victims. There's nothing. He didn't kill himself. So those influencers are really looked upon now as shills. And as I said earlier, it was a great miscalculation by the Trump administration.
It indeed was. But all of this has been a miscalculation. And I don't believe that this is incompetence. I believe that they genuinely thought that they had their supporters in their hands, that they could get away with anything, even potentially collusion with an international sex trafficker of minors. And there was a huge build-up, wasn't there, to the releasing of the Epstein files, as we were told. And then, obviously, it resulted in what we saw this week. No wonder people are mad. No wonder people are mad. Pam Bondi, as one perfect example, the Attorney General, she's previously promised the public release of scores of records associated with federal probes into Epstein. And she's done a ton of interviews. She seems to love media. And she claimed that the delay was attributed to tens of thousands of videos within the FBI's possession showing potential pornography of minors. And I object to her use of language. She describes it all the time as child pornography. And as I say, someone who has dealt a lot with survivors, when you say that their experience was child pornography, I believe, as indeed do many survivors, that you are re-victimizing them. You are continuing to sexualize the children. Pornography suggests some sort of permission. It can never be permission in the abuse of children. This is child sexual abuse. And so for the Attorney General to repeatedly refer to it as child pornography is very poor. It suggests to me that she doesn't give a flying monkeys about the truth of this. She gave an interview in March. She was asked about the increasing pressure from the MAGA base to release more files. She confirmed that the department was working to make them public. She said that the FBI director, Kash Patel, was working on providing the Department of Justice with a timeline for the next document release. She said, we will get out as much as we can, as fast as we can to the American people. But here's the thing. Even though she's only answerable to the American people, this is an issue that is of international interest. As we have seen online this week, there have been people from all around the world saying, I'm not American, but I want to know the truth about Jeffrey Epstein. And one of the reasons why people say that is Jeffrey Epstein had links all over the world, as is evident in England and the UK, in Israel, in parts of the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. So, and the chances are, because he was at times considered an unremarkable financier, there were other reasons that he was able to connect with so many people. And I think that Trump has miscalculated the public mood here on a seismic level. And in fact, I believe he has also made himself look more guilty than ever with the response that he and his department have given this week. And you see, the thing is, one of the reasons why I think that the MAGA base are so angry is Trump and his administration have sold themselves on the idea that they're anti-establishment. And what has happened is his fan base have now discovered that he's part of the same swamp that he's promised to drain. People go, but why didn't Joe Biden release anything if this implicates Donald Trump in some way? Well, probably because Joe Biden was protecting his own party, including the Clintons. This is a cross-party issue. Nobody should assume this is only about the Democrats or the Republicans or Labour or conservatives. Child abuse and the trafficking of minors has no political affiliations. Nonces just be nonces. This is not draining the swamp. I am not at this stage, to be clear, calling Donald Trump a nonce, but I am calling him someone who is continuing the cover-up. And most people know it. This is not draining the swamp. This is protecting the swamp at all costs. And we can't forget Trump's history with Maxwell and Epstein. They were part of a similar social arena. Both men had residences in Palm Beach and in New York. They were repeatedly photographed together. Let's bring in an image, which there's so many of Trump and Epstein. They were friends for well over a decade, even though they fell out, which is what Trump has said. And I accept that they did fall out, but that still doesn't mean that Trump is not implicated in some way. Let's just bring in this image. Somewhere, which kind of tells you how far they go back, really. Some sources suggest that it was Epstein who introduced Melania to Trump. Nonetheless, it was Glenn's establishment connections that brought Trump into Epstein's orbit. And as I say, they maintained a decade plus long friendship. And people said that Trump was taken in by Maxwell and Epstein's personality. Who knows? In 2002, Trump would tell New York Magazine, I've known Jeff for 15 years. He's a terrific guy. Adding that Epstein had a reputation for young women. He said, he's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life. And that was in a story which was headlined, Jeffrey Epstein, International Money Man of Mystery. International Money Man of Mystery, indeed. And they were good friends. Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, told the Washington Post only last year that Trump rode in his brother's private plane numerous times. But he added that he was only present on one flight. And Mark Epstein has now told MSM that he believes Trump could be behind his brother's death. As I say, Trump and Epstein, they had a falling out, and Trump then went on repeatedly to link Epstein to the Clintons. Trump told reporters in recent years that he banned Epstein from his Mar-a-Lago estate, that their falling out was the result of being on opposite ends of a real estate deal. Whatever the reason was, in the years after Epstein had pleaded guilty, Trump did everything he could to distance himself from his former close friend. And at times he did all he could to link Epstein to his, at the time, Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton. Just months before Trump had announced his initial presidential run at the conservative conference, CPAC, in February 2015, Trump was asked by Fox News for his thoughts on former President Bill Clinton. And Trump said, nice guy. Got a lot of problems coming up, in my opinion, with the famous island with Jeffrey Epstein. A lot of problems. Now, the thing about Donald Trump is he is the master of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. He does it about everybody who falls foul of him or who is in opposition to him in some way. And what is unquestionable is that Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton were close. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the painting that hung in Epstein's apartment, in one of Epstein's apartments, rather. It's a bizarre painting, I feel, of former President Bill Clinton wearing red heels and a blue dress. And this hung in Epstein's Manhattan mansion. And the painting is titled Passing Bill. It was made by a New York based Australian artist Patrina Ryan Clyde. And I'd love to know what was the inspiration behind that. Probably quite similar to the portrait also of George Bush sitting down on the floor, another portrait that Epstein had holding a plane. Obviously, bear in mind it was George Bush who was the president when 9/11 happened. So when Trump was asked later about Clinton and the alleged sexual abuse that took place on Epstein's Caribbean island, Little St. James, Trump said that island was really a cesspool. There's no question about it. Just ask Prince Andrew. He'll tell you about it. So it would appear that when Trump was running on all the occasions, certainly this first occasion when he was running to be president, Trump had no problem pointing the finger at other people who he essentially appeared to implicate in abuse. That's what seemed to happen. And in 2019, Bill Clinton's office released a statement saying the former president was not close with Epstein, had not spoken with him in over a decade, and knew nothing about Epstein's alleged crimes. The statement also, interestingly, asserted that Clinton's never traveled to Little St. James, Epstein's New Mexico ranch, or his residence in Florida, which has been refuted. But Trump has continued to push the Clinton link, although all of a sudden he's silent when he has a chance to do something. And that's why when people if they had anything on Trump, Biden would have released it. No, these people put party before people. It's important to understand that. They do that in the UK as well. It was one of the reasons I made my film Paedophiles in Parliament, because there were 40 years of allegations involving members of Parliament and the British establishment. And what we certainly learned, or rather what I certainly learned while researching that, was Margaret Thatcher promoted certainly one man, if not more, who she had been told had an interest in young boys. And it's because these people put party, as I say, before people. So even though Trump was calling out the Clintons when he was running for president, now he has the presidency, he's still in protection mode, in my opinion. And Trump, like Clinton, like all of them, has done all he can to distance himself from Epstein. But the sheer volume of images of them together makes that somewhat farcical. And Trump's lawyer, Alan Garton, said in 2017 that Trump had no relationship with Mr. Epstein and had no knowledge whatsoever of his conduct. Well, I think now we should start to introduce some of the people who were working behind the scenes and had links with both Trump and Epstein. So throughout his time in office, Trump has worked closely with lawyers who were on both ends of Epstein's legal battle in the mid-2000s. That those who were charged with his prosecution and those who defended him as a client. And I'm talking here about former Labour Secretary Alex Acosta. He actually resigned from his role in the Trump administration in July 2019 after facing public pressure for his role in Epstein's 2008 sweetheart plea deal. Trump also worked with Ken Starr, who was also involved with negotiating the same heinous deal, or fabulous deal, for Epstein. And in 2007 to 2008, Alexander Acosta, was US attorney. And as I say, he approved the plea deal that allowed the child trafficking of Epstein to plead guilty to a single, I just want to remind you of this, to a single state charge of solicitation with an adult, because they were all very clear to keep it away from anything to do with children. And this was obviously in exchange for a federal non-prosecution agreement. This was a man who worked in a series of important roles under numerous presidents, including George Bush, Barack Obama, and more recently, as I say, Donald Trump. And Trump would enlist Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz to be his legal counsel during the impeachment proceedings. And Virginia Giuffre has alleged in a lawsuit that Dershowitz was a participant in Epstein's sex trafficking operation and that she had sex with Dershowitz as part of that operation. And she has also made similar allegations against Dershowitz in court filings in the past. He has repeatedly denied the allegations. He's countersued Virginia Giuffre. They eventually settled with Virginia eventually settled with Dershowitz. She retracted what she had said, saying she may have been confused. This week, I want to refer back again to this week and other people and interesting coincidences, if that is what it is. This week, when they released the memo on Sunday night, Monday morning, it happened to coincide with a trip to the White House by Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who told Trump that he had nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. What was this about? Because US, as we know, is even more compromised. Actually, is it even more compromised than the UK? I did a live investigation a couple of weeks ago about how the UK is infiltrated by the Israeli lobby, many aspects of the Israeli lobby, but I focused on Friends of Israel, and the UK government is absolutely infiltrated with the Israeli lobby. And we know absolutely, thanks to the sterling work of organizations like AIPAC Tracker, we know absolutely that the leading lights in Trump's administration have been receiving huge sums of money from the Israeli lobby. And you can tell because they're all Israel first. But it was interesting to me that the coinciding of the release of this long-awaited memo and Benjamin Netanyahu. And the reason that I say that is there has long been evidence of Epstein's connections to Israel and their secret service, the Mossad. And that's just, I think we should bring this in now as another picture. If I can find it. Bear with me. Do bear with me. Oh, why am I not seeing it? That's odd. That's odd. I was looking for an image of, oh, no, it's here. I found it. I was looking for an image of Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. This was not the one that was taken this week. Oh, it's not letting me share. Let me just remove that and I'll try it again. I think we should always know who we're dealing with. And I always like to try and bring up a picture as best I can to be able to discuss this. So obviously, we know absolutely that Donald Trump, as indeed Keir Starmer. So this is not, again, this is not a party political broadcast. It's just whoever is involved, and I will state them. But what we do know is that Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a Mossad spy. He served, and as Nick Bryant said, Ghislaine Maxwell is serving time, but for supplying girls to whom? So I just want to talk now about the long Israeli connections that have long been known around Jeffrey Epstein, and that may explain what took place this week and that interesting connection of Benjamin Netanyahu being at the White House on Monday and apparently nominating Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. So what evidence is there? Well, first of all, we do know that in 2015, Epstein invested in a Israeli business, Report Homeland Security. This was a startup. It was connected with Israel's defense industry. It was headed by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and who Virginia Giuffre had accused of abusing her. He was also at one time the defense minister and the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. And as I say, Virginia had claimed that she had been trafficked to him. Epstein had past experience with Israel's research and military sector. That was well known. In April 28, as one example, 2008 rather, as one example, he went to Israel. He met with a number of research scientists and visited different Israeli military bases. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to get Nick Bryant involved in today's show is because he's been on this story a lot longer than I have. And I'm the type of journalist where I'm quite happy to defer to anybody else who may know more than me. I don't have an ego in this. I have a very strong ego, but not when it comes to the truth. If somebody else has an inroad in or an insight into the truth, whether they're another journalist or not, I will speak to them. I'm interested in speaking to them. But I asked Nick what he thought about, given all the history that we've heard about Epstein's involvement with the Mossad via Ghislaine Maxwell, via Robert Maxwell, whether he thought it was a coincidence. And this is what Nick had to say. Have a listen.
I don't know. It could have been a coincidence. It could have been some. And when you look into stories like this, you find things that could be something, an indication of something ominous, or it could be a coincidence. I don't have proof either way. So I really can't comment on it. It's very interesting timing though. But people have asked me, was it the Mossad that was helping Jeffrey Epstein? And I believe that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with the Mossad, and his co-pimp, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was certainly involved. And I think that her father probably got her involved. But I also say that I just cannot see the CIA letting Israeli intelligence compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence. I believe that the Mossad and the CIA work together, kind of like the Genovese crime family and the Gambino crime family work together.
Exactly. And I agree with that. I don't think for a second that any American organization under the jurisdiction of the administration would be interested in getting involved unless there wasn't something in it for them. And there's plenty of evidence of blackmail that was taking place around Epstein. He installed concealed cameras in numerous places on his properties to allegedly record sexual activity with underage girls or prominent people for criminal purposes, such as blackmail. It's an old trick. Maxwell had told an old friend that Epstein's private island was completely wired for video. And the friend believed that Maxwell and Epstein were videotaping everyone on the island as an insurance policy. And when police raided Epstein's Palm Beach residence in 2006, 2 hidden cameras were discovered in his home. It was also reported that Epstein's mansion in New York was wired extensively with a video surveillance system. In fact, Maria Farmer, an artist who worked for Epstein in 1996 and the first known person to report Epstein, noted that Epstein showed her a media room in the New York mansion where there were individuals monitoring the pinhole cameras throughout the house. The media room was accessed through a hidden door. And she stated in the media room, and I'm quoting her directly, there were men sitting there. And I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed. She added that it was very obvious that they were like monitoring private moments. So they were monitoring activity in the bed as well as toilet activity. So bizarre. So very bizarre. But there's a huge amount to inform us that Epstein was up to his eyeballs and beyond to do with Israel, including the accusations that a former prime minister had abused Virginia Giuffre. And again, more names over the years have continued to come out. As actually, I want to talk about this shortly, and that is the deaths around Epstein as well. In fact, I'll talk about it now. And one example, so there's like a death count. We know that, right? Which includes Virginia Giuffre, which includes Jean-Luc Brunel, and also includes the son of a judge. So on July 15th, 2020, because I think this all plays into the same thing in terms of quite who has been bought here and what happens when people say too much. So Virginia had no problem whatsoever saying there is an Israeli involvement. And again, just before I go on to the death count, I just thought that the timing this week was very, very interesting. Me personally, and going back to this is my opinion now, I believe that that memo was decided to be released when Netanyahu arrived at, in Washington at the White House to coincide with the trip. And it was a nod to say, we're done. We're not going to allow any more exploration. You're all right, BB. Everything's fine. It's all taken care of. And none of that is beyond the realms of possibility. None of it. It is absolutely evident to me that we are dealing with liars. That is absolutely evident. So yes, absolutely, there is and has been for a very long time an Israeli involvement. Whether it was a coincidence that Netanyahu was at the White House or not, this week is a whole other story. So, but I just thought that was interesting. And, as Nick said, the Mossad have been involved for a long time. So I want to just talk briefly about the death count, which includes Jean-Luc Brunel, this guy. And he was a prolific abuser. He had a modeling agency, a French guy, very close to Jeffrey Epstein. And he died while in custody in France. We were told again, another suicide by hanging. And I don't know anybody who believes that. I don't know anybody. Then there was this horrendous case. I don't know if you heard about this. And this was for New Jersey federal judge Esther Salas. She was assigned to handle a class action lawsuit from Deutsche Bank investors who claim that the company failed to monitor high-risk customers, including Jeffrey Epstein. This was in July 2020. And 4 days after Judge Esther Salas was given that job, her son was dead and her husband Mark was in a critical condition after someone had posed as a FedEx courier and shot dead her son Daniel, just 4 days after she'd been given this case to do with Epstein and the people around it. She was in the basement at the time of the attack. She was not injured. The FBI led the investigation, and American lawyer Den Hollander was named a suspect. And the day after the attack on Salas's family, Den Hollander was found dead from what we were told was a self-inflicted gunshot wound in New York. And there was a list of judges, doctors, and other targets found in a rental car, which had been leased by him, and where his body was found. And of course, very sadly, more recently, Virginia. And I say very sadly because let me just bear with me. I say very sadly because I didn't know Virginia Giuffre, but I think a lot about her life was really sad, and I have a great deal of compassion for her, even if I didn't always approve of how she went about things. And one of the reasons that I had an issue with it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is about being a gatekeeping operation, because I think this is really key to what has taken place and how the cover-up has continued as well. But Virginia Giuffre was found dead at her Australia farm in April 2025. And Nick has written an extensive article about it, Requiem for Virginia, in which he and I are in agreement that we both believe at this point that Virginia did actually take her own life. And I know that's subject to a lot of questions, and I get that, and I don't have a problem with that, but that's my position. And the reason that I reached that conclusion turned out to be the same reason that Nick reached that conclusion. And Nick knew Virginia far better than I did. And he talked about how she'd had a hard life. She'd been abused from a very young age. Virginia had come into Maxwell and into Maxwell's sphere when she started working at Mar-a-Lago. This woman had been abused probably from about the age of 7. She was clearly let down by her family. She reconnected with her father, who worked at Trump's Mar-a-Lago, and she began working there. I think she was like getting towels for people and that sort of stuff that, young people do when they're 14 years old and want to earn a bob or two. And that was how she was introduced to Ghislaine. And it was hard. She'd had a hard life. She was clearly trafficked. I believe absolutely, unquestionably, whether that picture of her and Andrew is real or not, I believe that there is substantial evidence that she was trafficked, and trafficked to rich and famous people. But she also had, what we are told, there were allegations of years of domestic violence. And in fact, I've heard Nick talk about how that image that she showed online several weeks before it was announced she died, when she'd said that she had been involved, she'd been hit by a bus, and then it turned out that wasn't, that it had been a minor kind of collision. Nobody was hurt, to such a degree that the bus driver had not even reported it immediately, waited till they got home and then just kind of filled out all the paperwork. It was not major, but she posted an image online of her all kind of beaten and bruised, and Nick talks about how allegedly that was her husband who had done that. But it was that build up that convinced people like myself and Nick that she had taken her own life. And again, if you believe different, that's fine. I'm not here to try and convince anybody of anything. But what I do know, and what I do believe, is that Virginia was very much part of a gatekeeping operation. And I'm not necessarily blaming her for that, because the truth has not come out. And with the announcement this week from Trump's administration, they don't want it to. All we have been told repeatedly is that this story involved teenage girls kind of giving massages to Epstein and his friends. But that's a lie. Huge payouts have taken place. Non-disclosure orders have been signed. The lead whistleblowers seem to have agreed on a version of events and have maintained it. The Epstein Fund to pay victims of Jeffrey Epstein was handled by David Boies and Stanley Pottinger. They're lawyers with a history of extremely problematic dealings. And a number of people have done great research into, like Stanley Pottinger as one example. Johnny Vedmore has done great work into looking into Stanley Pottinger. But there was a criteria that was set for anybody who wished to receive funds from the Epstein Fund. And that became the official narrative. And here is Nick talking about how that became the cover story. Let me bring that in.
For victims to get money from the compensation fund, they had to adhere to the cover story. And the cover story was that the youngest victim was 14 years old. I have been in the anti-trafficking field for 22 or 23 years, and I've spoken at a lot of conferences. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a international summit every year. I've spoken at 3 of those. The International Society for the Study and Trauma of Dissociation has an international meeting, and I've spoken at one of those. I've spoken at one of their seminars. And I've gotten to know a number of therapists that actually work with child sexual abuse victims. And there's 2 therapists I know. One's a very eminent psychologist. She is very well known in this field, and the other one is a very good therapist. And they had clients that they felt Epstein had trafficked when they were under 10 years old. And we're getting that and that's coming from other sources too, that the victims were definitely, a lot of the victims were under 14 years old. But they helped their clients apply for a settlement and they didn't get it. And they both felt that the reason why they didn't get a settlement is because their clients had been trafficked when they were under the age of 10, and it didn't fit the cover story that the media and the government have tried to sell about Epstein.
Indeed. And I completely agree with Nick. That was a cover story. I've said it before. It was a gatekeeping operation to make people believe that it only, and this is not to dismiss what took place with teenage girls, not at all. But I've always maintained that there is a far darker story out there. But we have been sold this essentially slot because it's a lie. And Nick used two examples of an eminent psychologist, and they had clients that who wanted to receive from the fund, but they were not the age that was set for the narrative. The narrative was 14 years old and above, whereas Nick is clearly talking about children under the age of 10. It's a lot darker. And Virginia was part of maintaining that narrative for whatever reason. And I don't think we can rule out the fact that she may have been terrified throughout her life of what they were going to do to her. It would be ridiculous for us not to. These people, in governments, they kill for less, right? So it may well be that these women went along with the official narrative, not only to receive money themselves, but also because they were terrified for their own lives. That is absolutely plausible. And also, of course, as Nick said, he had the black book. Epstein's former butler had attempted to sell it with the names and contacts of information of witnesses and victims. There was a great deal of information in there. And, Nick has also talked about how Virginia the butler had circled names in the book, and some of them were confirmed by Virginia Giuffre, including, as I say, Maxwell, Dershowitz, Wexner, Ehud Barak, Bill Richardson, who was a former energy czar for Bill Clinton. And Epstein had multiple contact details for multiple influential people. And I do not accept that the allegations only, and again, I don't mean only in a dismissive way, not at all, but I do not accept that the allegations only are only pertaining to teenage girls giving massages to rich men. That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so that fund, to receive money from the fund, became the cover story. And that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And so obviously we had all the backtracking this week. Trump's team backtracked like nobody's business. And anyone who's done a cursory look at this case knows there exists scores of evidence. So the question is, who are they running cover for and whom? The president of the United States, Donald Trump? Possibly, we cannot rule it out. Trump has made numerous weird comments over the years about young women, including his own daughter. Israel, the special relationship between America and Israel, are they running cover for them? And was that what this was about this week? Because, as the Longer Game said in the tweet that I read out earlier, they love their symbology. These things have power and life for these darker forces. And I consider, for the most part, if you've got to the heights of being a president or a prime minister, you are absolutely in tune in what is going on the dark side and what is being hidden. Of that, I'm in no doubt whatsoever. And, in terms of the ruling this week, I think I mentioned this, Epstein's brother claimed that the ruling only further fueled the speculation that his brother was murdered. He said every time they say something or do something to try to quash the facts, that he was most likely murdered. They just put their foot further down their mouths. And he went on to criticize a number of people. But this has, so the reality is, not only have they attempted to seal the deal this week, but they want it to go down in history that the story was of teenage girls going and giving massages to Epstein, and that was it. But there's a whole lot of darker stories that we've heard about that involved transhumanism, stuff that took place at Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. In fact, even one woman, and I'll find her quote shortly, she talked about coming round and waking up. Epstein was into transhumanism. A lot of these technocrats are, by the way. I'm sure you realize that. It's not impossible to believe that there was all manner of stuff taking place at the New Mexico ranch. Certainly, there's been a lot of allegations about it, about the very, very dark stuff, including cloning as one example, and including organ harvesting as another example. And we can't rule that out. We're dealing with really dark people here that I don't believe their darkness stopped at teenage girls. Not at all. That's, I think, to try to make us like we're idiots, right? Try to make us like we're idiots. So while many have been absolutely appalled this week, including the MAGA base with Bondi, Patel and Trump, not all have been. Infamous Zionist Ben Shapiro wants us all to go along with what they said. I wonder why. Friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. And he really wants us now to change our view about what people have said for the longest time about Epstein and his friends. I do not trust Ben Shapiro, not at all, absolutely not. But we're now at this stage where the American administration we know they're lying. And what's scary is what are they going to do next? Because if they don't do anything, then they feel they can get away with it. We know they're lying. What is the next step after that? Are they going to come clean? I can't see that happening at all. Nick is calling for the release, obviously. Let me play you what he has to say. Have I got that's the correct one here? Let me just play what he has to say about this.
And we started a petition with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which we knew was going to be utter fiction. And we have, I think, 43,000 signatures on that. And then a couple of weeks ago, we started a petition on change.org that says Donald Trump has promised to release the Epstein files, and he must release them now. And that now we're approaching 13,000 signatures on that. So that's actually coming along much faster than the other petition. And the thing about petitions is we know that the Department of Justice isn't going to listen to the petition. We know that the FBI isn't going to listen to the petition. We know that Trump administration isn't going to listen to the petition or care about the petition. But what the petition does is it brings together like-minded people. And that's what's very important here, is that like-minded people come together. And we ultimately, I started an organization called Epstein Justice. It's a nonprofit organization. And we want a Truth and Reconciliation Commission from our Congress, the American Congress, to address Epstein.
Well, the chances of that happening, I would suggest, are not particularly high, but who knows? And I take his point. I'm not a great one for petitions, but I take his point about it bringing people together. But I think that what we're actually dealing with is a continued cover-up. I think it's absolutely evident. Nobody believes what they released this week. And again, this whole idea of why didn't Biden release if it implicated Trump? Because they're all in it together. They're all in it together. So my feeling very much is that this is like such mass gaslighting that they've done to us this week, and I object to it, especially because it involves young people, and it's just ridiculous. The idea that there's no evidence, the idea that there's not a client list, the idea that Epstein did not kill himself. The reality was Epstein was an abuser of children and young females, and that also includes boys as well. We often don't hear about young boys, but people have said to me there were young boys involved. Epstein did not work alone. It was an industrial scale operation. He had clients in terms of who was involved in procuring young people for the rich and famous, and the price they paid was blackmail. We've not heard the half yet of what really went on. As I say, the Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, it's actually Julia Bryant who record what was going on. And as I say, Epstein was a transhumanist, like many of these technocrats. This is a textbook cover-up from beginning to end. What you have is the initial incident, the wrongdoing, which was the trafficking and abuse of children and young girls. Then there was the decision to cover up over a period of time, the motivations to avoid criminal charges in prison, to avoid public humiliation, to avoid the damage to reputation, to avoid financial loss. They've rationalized it on protecting the parties and on national security. And the cover-up process has involved concealing evidence. That might also have involved the destruction or altering of documents, which could also have taken place on the previous administrations. They may well have destroyed documents. Stories have been fabricated, the whole gatekeeping operation. They have suppressed information as they are doing now. And there has been an intimidation of witnesses. They have fabricated explanations. They have created an alternative narrative to explain the incident or to deflect the blame. They claimed it was only about teenage females. It was not. They targeted whistleblowers. They suppressed and silenced individuals with lawsuits and various other ways who attempted to expose the cover-up. They've manipulated information. They've controlled the flow of the information, what we receive, what the public receive, what the media receives. And the aftermath of it all is no one trusts any of them who are alleged to be involved. Can Trump's team recover from this? I doubt it very much. I doubt it very much. And I think it would be very interesting. Somebody dropped me a line this morning saying that the American administration will now be releasing the Epstein documents. Well, I haven't seen that. And if that's the case, then that's very interesting. But if they do now, because we know they've got some, they've definitely got some. If they do now, that will be because they were not able to convince their base and the rest of the world that they were telling us the truth. And I just wanted to talk about that all this morning because it really angers me so much that these people are allowed to get away with it. And one of the reasons why this matters to people like me and to Nick Bryant wrote the book about the Franklin scandal. And he feels that by continuing to pursue these people, he's almost like standing up for the victims of the Franklin scandal. Very similar thing. Government ministers involved, high profile officials, local officials, same thing. I think we've got to the stage in our world now where we need to be questioning whether they're in positions of power because they're involved in something dodgy or another. I want to look at your quotes now. Or not quotes, your comments. What's going on? Right, let's start reading them. At the start of the year, this is Paul, says, at the start of the year, I thought the wheels would come off the Trump admin by the end of the year. I was well out. It's no, here's the thing. I've got somebody in the comments saying, cut to the chase, right? And it's not about one race of people or one political party. And I think we're in danger doing that. We're really in danger doing that. Clearly, there is Zionist connections taking place here. Clearly, absolutely. We've already talked about that. But to want to reduce it to just one group is to almost do what the gatekeeping operation have done. And everything, Shug said, everything we see and hear is contrived and controlled by the puppet masters. Discernment is paramount in these days. And Sean said, yes, it's not left or right or Democrat or Republic. It's both. Yes, indeed. And Hunting Swan, I tend to agree with what you're saying, that Hunting Swan says all religions foster pedophilia. Well, we've clearly seen how pedophilia has been protected by all religions. And Jan, I agree with you. It's all made very complicated on purpose to deceive the public. And Keith, it is Zionism. That's what we're dealing with. And I think that we're in danger of falling into their trap when we just want to say, oh, it's only this group or it's only that group. Zionism is a clear framework around a lot of this, no doubt about it, because that's where a lot of the bribery and the blackmail takes place. But I think we will mislead ourselves if we follow the course that it's only one group. And I don't want to do that. And Derek said Epstein is alive. Nobody looks for a dead, though. And this is something that we've also heard. We've heard many times, although there's no evidence or proof of it. But I think for many people, it's becoming increasingly obvious that whatever took place in that cell in August 2019, it didn't involve him taking his own life. So there you go. So I just wanted to say all that. And I thank you for being here today. And I thank the more than able input from Nick Bryant. Really great stuff. And thank you for being here. Thank you for everybody who is involved in contributing to Wake Up. I hope what I've been able to do today is, by evidence, show all of the associations, not just in the past, which is what Trump wants us to believe, but right up until the present day. Many of these people who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein still exist, and they are still in places of influence. Clearly, it's a cover-up. Whether we'll find out the truth about it is a whole other story. It is a sorry story, as I said, of an international conspiracy. And that's where I want to leave it. Thank you for being here. I want to, again, thank everybody who's commented today. I'll be looking through some of the comments. And yeah, this is a credit of my Patreons and anybody else who has made this possible today. Thank you.
Time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.
It is indeed. You are all stars. Thank you for being here. I will see you on Monday. Take excellent care of yourself.